I'm Allie with Potomac Beads. Join me in creating a multi-row right angle weave bracelet. I'm going to show you the quickest way, in my opinion, to do this and the easiest way to learn. So make sure, even if you know raw stitch, you may want to watch to get the details on those time-saving elements that I'm about to show. So when starting right angle weave or starting to learn multi-row right angle weave, I always suggest to start with larger beads. Whether or not you're starting with 6mm, like I taught in a Facebook Live, or you're going into 4mm. I wanted to show that I have some 6/0 seed beads here, which are about 4mm. I have some 4mm bicones in the coral color, and then I have some 4mm turquoise rounds. I like to show this variety because most people think right angle weave, bead weaving, you can only do it with seed beads. Not true at all. Do it with a variety of beads and a variety of colors, especially when you're learning and figuring out how to make this happen. I prefer to start a multi-row right angle weave project with 2 needles. Now I know some people will debate me on that 2 needle issue, but here's the reason. 1, you get to put on your clasp right away. Number 2, with the multi-row right angle weave, you're using a fair amount of thread to create it because you're sewing back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. When you have 2 needles, you're splitting your thread in half. So you're going to actually bead faster because you're not pulling as much thread through the project. So instead of starting out with 5 feet and 1 needle, I'm starting out with 5 feet and 2 needles, which is basically breaking it down to 2.5 feet each. So that way it's going to be a faster attack to this right angle weave. I have a button here because most people have a button at home, and I'm using the cut button, and I do have some seed beads here, just some 11/0 seed beads. You can use 8/0s, 11/0s. I'm just using these to get started on my pattern. So I have my size 6 green dragon thread on here on 2 size 10 needles. I'm going to make sure that my threads stay to equal amounts, and I'm dropping those 3 beads down to the bottom. You can see on the sample here I have a toggle. It would be the same way. From here I'm going to take both needles through my cut button, bowl side down, and then out to the back. And what I'm going to do is just add 3 beads to each needle. Now, if you don't like working with 2 needles at a time, that's fine. Work with 1 needle, put the other one into your bead mat or your bead board, and then pick up the other one. I'm putting 3 beads on each needle, and then I'm going to go in and start my right angle weave. My introduction, or my first row of right angle weave, is going to be 2 different beads. I'm going to work with my turquoise and my coral. My turquoise beads I'm going to pick up first. The holes are going to go lateral. The coral beads, the holes are going to go vertical, and I'll explain that as we get further into the design. From here, I want to take my first center bead for my right angle weave, that first horizontal bead, and I'm going to take my needle and thread through it opposite directions. One needle's going from the right side over to the left, and the other is going from the left over to the right. When I pull my thread and needle, I want to make sure that I still have an equal amount of thread on both sides. See how you get that nice little triangle almost effect there? From here, I'm going to pick up beads for the sides. 1 coral is going to go on the right, 1 coral is going to go on the left. When I look at the project and sit it so that the bracelet is facing up and down, the coral beads are going to have the holes facing that they're on lateral. The turquoise beads are going to be facing on that horizontal. So I'm going to go in and add my next turquoise beads, and every time I add a turquoise bead, I'm going to take it and crisscross the thread through the needle. Now this is not traditional right angle weave. This is a 2 needle right angle weave, or some people might call it diagonal stitch. But you're getting the same effect. I'll go over why it's not exactly right angle weave, but the beads are still sitting in the exact same positions. We're going to concentrate on learning with the 2 needles first and then go into 1 needle. From here, I'm going to continue that center design. So this is my center row of my project. I'm going to do a coral again on each side. That coral is sitting, so the holes are facing up and down. And then I'm going to put on a turquoise, and that turquoise is going to get the thread crisscross between, and it's going to sit opposite. When looking at this design now, this is going to be 2 units of your right angle weave design. Unit number 1 consists of the first 4 beads. Unit number 2 consists of the 3 we just added, the coral on each side and the turquoise, and then we're also sharing the last bead added from unit number 1. We'll continue to go in and build our center row, and here's where the 4mm are nice rather than using like an 11 OC bead because it's going to go quick. 6mm, it goes even quicker. On the right hand needle now, I'm picking up the turquoise as I pick up the coral because that's going to be a faster way to add your beads. Once again, keep going with that center unit. When doing 2 needles, you are only going to ever have 1 piece of thread through the coral beads that are on the sides. Traditional right angle weave, you're going to get 2 threads through 1 of the coral beads in each unit. This unit here might be on the right. The next one will have 2 threads to the left. Next one will have 2 threads to the right. I'm going to do 1 more unit, and then I'm going to show you how to do it with 1 single needle, although we're going to continue double the whole length of the middle of the bracelet. So I have 1 more unit here that I'm creating, adding in, and creating that little square. It's called right angle weave because you're getting a series of right angles. So you have that 90 degrees in all the corner points as you're working with it. All right, so that is 2 needle, going up the sides, adding 1 bead and crisscrossing through that center. Once you have this design and you know the way that the beads are sitting, that's when it's easier to learn how to do it with 1 needle. When doing right angle weave with 1 needle, the beads are going to sit in the exact same fashion as 2 needles. From here, I am going to put on my thread and needle. I'm working with my right side, my next 3 beads of this unit. So just like we did with 2 corals and then we crossed through the turquoise, I need those same 3 beads on my needle. The beads on the needle are going to start out with 1 coral, 1 turquoise, 1 coral. That's going to be the progression to get my beads to sit exactly like I did with 2 needles. From here, my thread is going to circle around. So just ignore your left thread for right now. My thread is going to circle around and I'm going to go back through that last bead in the right angle unit that I just completed. That circles the beads around. And look, they're going to sit in the exact same position as they were with 2 needles. Now my needle on the right here is still down in the first bead, which is the last bead from the last unit. I need to progress, so I'm always coming out through that last bead that sits with the hole on the horizontal. So I need to go up through the bead on the right and then through that bead that sits with the holes going lateral. And then I'm ready to do my next right angle unit. Once again, coral, turquoise, coral. These 3 beads will get added to the last bead that I added from the last right angle unit. Once again, circling around, just ignore that left thread again. Circling around, my thread's coming out the left this time, so I'm going into the right of the bead. Same, I can't go in and add any more because my needle's down here. So how do I get to that bead? You're going to go through the side, and you'll notice the last right angle weave, we doubled the thread through the right-hand side. This time, we're doubling the thread through the left-hand side. Right angle weave is just a series of figure 8s. If you draw it out on paper with your thread line, and you're always going to have the instance where the thread gets doubled on the left, the right, the left, the right, and so forth. Now I'm going to go back in here and let my left needle catch up, but I'm going to do this 1 more time just so everybody's got it. 4mm beads go on, 2 of my crystals with a turquoise in between, because that's my next right angle weave unit, going through the turquoise bead from the opposite side. And then once again, I have to get to that top bead. So I'm going to go up through the right, because that's the side my thread is on, and then through that middle bead. That's going to establish that 1 needle right angle weave. So I'm going to go in now and I am going to catch up. See that little gap there? That's from this thread here. I'm going to tighten that up and just follow my thread line till I have my needle and thread up at the very top of the bead. From there, I'll continue the 2 needle method for the center row of my right angle weave design. So once you finish up with your center row, you're going to go in, and the nice thing about 2 needles is you can add your other side of your clasp right away. So you'll see I repeated what I did at the button stage, adding 3 seed beads to each side, and then I took one 4mm bead in the turquoise, since my center row is the turquoise color, and instead of crisscrossing the threads through, I want a nice Y or a nice V effect, so I took both threads through that same turquoise beads. I then added approximately 28 11/0 seed beads, and I took both threads through those seed beads. So both thread and needle in the same direction went through the 4mm and then all through the seed beads. From here, I'm going to sew back down through the 4mm, and one thread is going to make it over to the right, and then back through the 4mm. The other thread is going to make it to the left. Going in here then, I'm going to pull that extra thread. Always a good idea to check your loop if you're using a button, so that way you make sure that it fits. If you're not, you can use a wire guard and a metal clasp, and you're ready to go. So from here, I'm going to go in and get ready to start my next rows of my right angle weave. We're going to start one row off to the right and one row off to the left. The needle that's on the right is going to crisscross through that last turquoise bead, and then I'm going to come down through the bead that's on the left-hand side, that coral bead that's sitting on that vertical. From here, needle that's on the left comes over to the right, crisscrossing through, and then once again down through that last bead. Now I'm in a position and I'm ready to start my additional rows. If you have any thread that's still showing, here's a great time, tighten that up. Push your beads down and then give a nice tight pull to tighten up those thread ends. All right, so from here now we're doing one needle. So we're going to do traditional right angle weave as we go in and we build the sides of our bracelet. For the sides of our bracelet, I'm going to be using some 6/0 seed beads, and then I'm also going to be using my turquoise bead again. So they're going to be 6/0 seed beads are going to be about the same size as the turquoise bead. We're going to do the whole way down on the right, or maybe halfway, and then we'll start doing halfway down the left. It's going to start out the same though as we begin the design. The thread that's on the right is going to stay to the right side. Coming out that last coral bead, instead of now sharing the bead that sits with the thread going on the vertical, we're now going to share the bead with the thread, or the thread with the bead that sits on the horizontal. So how is this going to work? Notice how we have a little box here, and our blue is basically the bottom of the box and the top of the box, and our turquoise or our coral are the sides. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make the bottom of the box brown for the next one, the right-hand side of the box turquoise, and the top of the box brown. The left side of the box on this side is going to be the coral. I have 3 beads that I'm adding to create and make my next right angle unit. After this, when you're adding the second row, we're only going to add 2 beads at a time, and I'll explain that when we get to it. So our thread's coming out through the right-hand bead on the last right angle weave unit. I add these 3 beads, and I'm circling around just like I did previously when learning with one needle, going back through the bead my thread is coming out of. That puts these beads into another right angle unit. So see my 4 beads there, creating that right angle unit? Now what I'm going to do is add additional beads to make my next right angle unit. Now if I'm here, I can't get to my next right angle unit. So where do I need to be to add my next beads? Just like I did previously, I need my thread and needle to be coming out through one of the beads. This time it's that brown 6/0 bead that sits with the holes on that horizontal. Going to the next row, picking up, I'm going to attach to the next right angle unit from the center row. Always the right-hand bead on the coral, and my thread is always exiting as I start the next right angle weave unit in the last bead or the bottom bead of the right angle unit that I just finished. Here on the side, I'm going to add a turquoise because that's going to be on the side, and then I'm going to add one of my brown 6/0 seed beads. From here, I have 2 beads that are already part of my next right angle unit. My thread's coming out of that brown bead, and I'm going to go into the coral from the second center unit. Sewing up makes this into a rounded circle. Now again, when I'm here, I haven't completed my circle. I don't have thread connecting the coral and that brown bead, so I'm going to sew back through that brown bead. Just like I said in the previous row, I need to come down through the coral, or down through the turquoise rather, and over through the brown bead. And then I'm ready to start my next right angle unit. So I've completed 2 additional right angle units in the second row of my right angle weave. From here, my thread and needle, I know I need 2 more beads added to the next unit. My thread and needle coming out the bottom here, I think, oh yeah, I already have that coral bead on. So I can sew down through the coral bead from the center right angle weave row. And then I know that I need to add 2 beads. To add 2 beads, I need my brown bead or my floor, and I need my right side of my box. I'm going to go back through the bead that my thread was coming out of originally, back through that brown bead. And then once again, I need to get down to the bottom. How am I getting to the bottom? Going back through that coral, and once again, back down through that bead. From here, we just repeat over and over again. Coral goes on, turquoise goes on, brown bead goes on. Where do I need to go from here? I'm going to connect to the coral bead from that center right angle weave row, and then I'm going to sew through the bead my thread was originally coming out of. From here, I need to get down to the bottom, so I'm sewing through the turquoise and through my seed bead. That is my completion of 1, 2, 3, 4 right angle units. So my 5th right angle unit here, how am I going to start out? Oh, my thread's coming out right next to my coral. I know that's part of it. Sew onto the coral, and then I'm going to once again add one of my brown beads and one of my turquoise. And then again, sew back through the bead my thread was originally coming out of. From here, I need to get down to that base bead, just like we were doing with the turquoise when we needed to get out of that turquoise, because I'm always going to start my next right angle unit with my bead where my thread is facing on a lateral direction. I'm not starting my units on that upright and down. The only time I'm doing that is back at that first unit. So from here, I'm going to go down through the whole design, adding in my additional beads, going in from that starter bead, the base of the last right angle box that I just created. I'm going to go down a little bit on the right-hand side, then I'll switch over to the left and vice versa to complete the design. You may be thinking a lot of thread is showing. That's okay for this first example. You can go in then if you want to and add 11 seed beads between each. You can embellish after, but right now you're just getting the technique, and these bigger beads will definitely make it easier for you to learn. So to get the other side started, I've stopped on this side, just flipping over to go in and reinforce how we're starting. So we're coming down through that coral, and again, each right angle unit that you add on your rows as you make more and you add on to that center row, you're going to be adding 2 beads at a time. But to start out, you need to do 3. You're adding 3 beads, and again, we're adding the brown, turquoise brown. We're coming out of that bottom of the coral bead, and we're going to sew in to the coral from the opposite direction. Once again, we always need to come out that brown bead and get our needle and thread there. You'll notice that this was on the left side. I just flipped the bracelet over because I'm faster sewing on the right side. From here, we're going to add 2 beads. We're adding a turquoise first because that's going to be on this side, oops, and we're adding a brown for the bottom. We're going to always connect to the coral from the center, and then we need to get back down to that brown. So I'm going to sew back through the bead that my thread was originally coming out of, down through the right side, and then back so I'm coming out through the brown bead. Once I'm out through the brown bead, I know I'm ready to start my next unit. My next unit is going to start going through the coral because that's already there, so I don't need to add it. We're going to add 1 brown bead. I'll grab a turquoise from further over, and then my turquoise bead. Back through the bead that your thread was originally coming out of, and now once again down to the bottom to that brown bead. Your right angle weave is just that series of figure 8s. And there you go. So you're going to continue alternating sides to get these 3 rows of right angle weave with those stark colors of difference. You can then do the same exact thing to add 5 rows or 6 rows. In my example here, you can see we did the center row, and then we did another row, and then we started adding another row, showing that it's just the exact same technique. Coming out the side turquoise bead, we added 3, came down, and we're coming out of that crystal. Adding 2, going up through the next side circle. So it's always the same no matter how many rows you add on when you're looking and creating the design. So if you are doing a multi-row right angle weave project and you've run out of thread, I generally start with not as much thread as I would when filming because it's easier to pull the thread through and stay in frame because we're looking at a postcard size or a little bit less. So I wanted to show you how you can easily add thread, especially when you're working with 2 needles. So I've come down the design a couple inches here, about 3 inches, and I've noticed that my thread is getting short. Now, if you do a good job of keeping your needle and thread the same length on each side as you get started, you're going to end at about the same place. What you're going to do then is we're going to go and work back into the center of the design and we're going to tie off the thread. So I'm going in here and I'm going to go into the coral bead and then I'm going to go into the turquoise bead. And this is the turquoise bead, 1 right angle row back. On the other side, same deal. I have just enough here to go back through the coral bead. So I'm going back into that center row of my right angle weave. And then once again, right there, my thread ends are matching and coming together. I have large beads, so I'm not going to worry about if I'm going to see the knot, not see the knot. You would weave in further to the design if you don't want to see the knot or you don't want a knot at all. I'm simply tying the 2 thread ends together. One of them came off, that's totally cool. The other one I still have on my needle. Tying those thread ends together twice in a nice square knot. I'm then going to take the one with the needle still on and I'm going to weave back into the design a little bit more. What this is going to do is separate out the threads so when I burn the thread ends off, you don't see them in the same area. So I'm just going, threading that back through, and I'm going to take my thread burner and burn off those thread ends. Now, how do I add new thread? So I'm going to add new thread just like I basically got rid of the old thread. I have my thread here. I'm going to thread my needles, and then I'm going to start back further in my right angle weave. So I'm going to start just like I did where I'm in half, sewing through that turquoise bead just like the start of the project, going in and threading one needle, threading the other, holding that thread in place while I push the needle down on it. And then once I know I have about equal amounts of tail or thread through the needle, I'm going to come back into the design here and I'm going to start a couple rows back. So I'm going to start here at this turquoise bead, make sure my thread ends are still matching, and now I'm going to do my 2 needle right angle weave, coming down through the design till I get to the point. So I'm just doing my right side right now, going back through that right angle weave, alternating sides, sewing into the design, basically till I get to the coral bead where I'm ready to start my next row on the outside. So here I am, and guess what? Now I'm ready. I'm going to sew back down to that brown, and now my thread's ready to go and start my right angle weave again. I'm going to do the same thing with the left needle, take it back through the design, and make sure that I'm coming out through the brown bead, and then I continue on the design just as I was previous to running out of thread. So when you're done with your multi-rows of right angle weave, like I said, if I want to start over here, I'd add a brown bead, a coral bead, a brown bead, circle back through, and then just continue my next row, just like I'm doing. Now I have my last row here on what was my left side, but is now my right. I'm finishing up my right angle weave design, and then we're going to reinforce, so I'm going the whole way back, making sure again that I'm getting ready to come out of that center. So you're going to come out just like you would be doing if you were continuing to add your next one. Instead of adding the next one here, I'm going to sew into the middle of the design. I'm not sewing right over to the turquoise bead because then my thread would show. I'm going to sew down through the bead that connects to the center right angle weave row. I'm going to sew through that center turquoise. I'm going to sew up through the coral, through the turquoise, and then that gets me in position to reinforce my clasp. Going up through those 3 beads, up through the center of the clasp. If you're like me and you're using a cup button, it's always great to put the needle and thread through that first seed bead. It makes it a lot easier at the top here. Then we're going to sew down through the cup button and down through the 3 beads on the other side and just hang out. Likewise, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to flip my thread and needle, coming out the turquoise, go back in towards that brown bead that you normally would be adding to. I'm going to go down through the coral because I don't want to hop over to the turquoise right away, because then we're going to see thread in an alternate direction. I'm going to go through that turquoise, through the coral, and I'm going to use it, since I have it, one more time to reinforce that thread. If you're using a thicker thread or thinner beads and you want to stop here, you can just take those 2 thread ends and tie them together as they get to the same side. From here, I'm going to go up through those seed beads, back down through the button, back through the seed beads on the alternate side, and then prior to going through that turquoise bead, guess what? Just like we did when we ended the thread and added more, I'm going to make my threads go and end in the same place. So from here, I'm going to take these 2 thread ends, tie them off, right over left, switch hands that you're doing with your thread. That creates that left over right. I got 2 nice knots. I'll do a 3rd one for good measure. And then I'm going to separate out my needles and come down through my right angle weave. So this one here, I'm going to go through my coral, come down a little bit, sew down a couple stitches, making sure that I'm just staying in those right angle weave units. And I'm going to burn off that thread end. With this other thread here, I'll do the same thing, but I'm going to go to an alternate place. So I'm going to go up here, through my right angle weave, up through the side, through the center, back down through the coral, maybe go through that brown bead there, down the side, down through the brown bead, and then I'll get ready to tie off my thread, or sorry, to burn off my thread. That is, in my opinion, going to be your easiest way to learn right angle weave. When you do right angle weave, multiple rows with larger beads like this too, you have the opportunity for a nice curve if you would want to make it into a necklace. When you have the smaller beads, sometimes that curve, you're going to need to use smaller beads on the top, bigger beads in the bottom to force that curve to happen. But hopefully this was a great introduction to learn how to do that multi-rows of right angle weave. So we've ended with 1, 2, 3 rows of our right angle weave in this beautiful bracelet design. Thanks so much for joining me and hopefully conquering your multi-row right angle weave technique. Remember, if you need any supplies, you can look below the video. In the description, we'll do links to shop with us online. You most likely have some things at home, so look through your stash, gather up your beads, and practice these right angle weave techniques. If you do want to and you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. As always, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully this tutorial does make you better at your right angle weave, and you stay tuned for the next inspirational video.